thanks for all joining us. I think it's probably high time to kick off this next session on mutual credit, a deep dive. We're going to assume that everybody has a basic background understanding of mutual credit because we had that session yesterday. But for now, I'd like to hand you over to Grace, who's going to chair this session with the people that we see on screen. And I'll give Grace a few minutes to introduce herself.
So yeah, basically, I've been working in the crypto space for a few years now. I've been in technology for about 30 years, and I'm not a dev, but I have been working in that realm. So I've been very interested in the areas of governance. I'm Israeli. We had this thing called the Arab Spring. I thought, wow, we need something better than what we've got now to govern ourselves. And so I've been working on that for about 10 years. And my experience with mutual credit is not at all, which is great. That means I ask questions with very little judgment, which, as you know, as a Jew, that's almost impossible to do, but I'll try. Anyway, so what I wanted people to introduce themselves, how I wanted to introduce themselves, is something about, like, because we all have long resumes, but is maybe your worst and best experience, or a very good and not so good experience with mutual credit, so that we can also, everybody doesn't just get an experience of like, oh, here's a list of what I've done, but really, here's some things that I know go right, here's some things that I know go badly. And I'm going to just start with Sue.
I'm going to look at very broad experiences, but I'm actually going to focus on mutual credit. I think the best experience I've ever had is part of Brixton Letts, when I found out that there was a babysitting circle that didn't bother to use the accounting system anymore. They met everyone from Brixton Letts and they created their own babysitting circle. I understand the implications of that, but my goodness, in the end, isn't that what we want to do, is to help people to empower and manage themselves? And interestingly enough, they had been, before, they had been worth more bricks, because that's what we used in Brixton Letts. They accrued more bricks with babysitting than computer trainers acquired. The worst experience, I think, is when I was involved, co-founded the Brixton Pound, and we were looking at businesses running the Brixton Pound, and nobody on our organization knew anything about being in business, didn't have a business, weren't interested in a business, never knew what it did. And I thought, how can you understand what the people who are doing, who are actually making this function, how can you understand the implications for them? Thanks, Grace.
Wonderful. So how about you, Matt?
Well, I find it very difficult to pull anecdotes out of my life, but the question made me think that I'm not sure I've ever had any experience of mutual credit, because mutual credit isn't a thing. I have experiences of groups and how they get on with each other. And I've no need to tell you good or bad experiences about those. But it's just worth pointing out that mutual credit isn't a thing. It's all about how we work together. And mutual credit only helps us to keep track of that.
Fabulous. So how about you, Giuseppe?
I would say pretty much like Matthews pointed out, mutual credit is a tool. Can be designed in various ways, but it means nothing unless you have a group of people, a group of companies, a group of entities that adhere to it, that subscribe to those rules and abide them. The hard bit is, again, getting them to understand the logic, if there is any in the scheme given. So good experiences. In general, I would say that being here today for me is already a good experience, in a sense that I would have never thought 10 years back that that what we started as a complete crazy endeavor without any hope but the hope to try it, it's still existing, still alive and kicking. So that's a great experience. Now, on the bad side, is it as strong as it could be? No. Is it as useful as it could be? No. Could given current circumstances and contexts, mutual credit or community currencies grow further on scale? And I'm saying, and I might sound a bit cocky, but going from 2 million per month to 4, we've done that. But going from 4 to 40 or to 80, that's another scale. And just talking on a context of a poor peripheral island, the GDP of Sardinia is 7,000 million euro per year. In 10 years, 4,000 companies, like 5,000 now, I would say 3,000 employees, 20,000 consumers, blah, 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 blah. So how much did they do? 500 million in 10 years. And we've, you know, and this is real. But the bad side of it is why? Why is this not growing further? There's a long list of reasons. I would just say that as working, respecting the law in a capitalist system, as we are all embedded in one, and trying to change the very, very fabric of it and the very, very blood that makes it run is definitely not something that you get helped for. You know, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy, there's like people going against shit. No. But what we're doing is not neutral, as money is not neutral. And yet the invisible institutional framework that enables the working of the social contract we call money is not understood, is not fair, and is not amendable. It's really hard to change. That's the point. The real protocol is what makes the dollar work. I'm sorry for Bitcoiners and the like, but you know, and that's it for me.
Fernanda.
Hi. Okay. So you asked about a good experience, and I want to build from what Matt was saying about mutual credit. It's not a thing. It's about the people. And I want to share about how my best experience is the one I'm going to have next, because I learned so much already that I know that one of the most important aspects of creating a successful community currency and a mutual credit is the champion, you know, the people that you bring in that are going to be the first ones that are going to be speaking about it, attracting the first circle, creating the enthusiasm, holding the governance, learning together. You know, for me, that's the seed. It's like if it's strong, then the currency can grow, the community grows strong, and then you have a lot of possibilities. And the way that it happened to me with Olines in Mexico is that the first team grows so strong that after so many years, they're still together. And that was precious. That's really precious, because then they get the opportunity to build trust. And you can see that whenever they're going to have a creation of different rules, or they want to open something for the community to do, the community trusts them, and there's social glue with them. So I am very hopeful that I want to implement a currency here in Maui, and it's going well, and I'm very happy with my champion. So my best experience is the one I'm going to have next.
I'm excited to hear about what doesn't work as well. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what people, look, it's really important, right? People here are listening because they want to know what to do, and they want to know what not to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a bad experience, if I will place something like a bad experience, because we learn from those experiences that are not necessarily the most positive. And if we wouldn't have them, we wouldn't learn. So I don't know if I would put the adjective of bad. But when I worked in the South Oregon time banks, one of the things that I was shocked about, it was how so difficult it was for people to let go of their scarcity mindset. So when you do mutual credit, you have to think that it's not money, and you're not going to be in debt, and people are not going to go knocking your door, and you're not owing. When your balance goes in negative, it just means that you received, and then it will be your opportunity to give. But people don't grasp that, and then they get really constrained or contracted when they are in debt. So you have to think it as a flow, when sometimes you're positive and sometimes you're negative, and it's all right. And part of what needs to happen is for people to get out of the lack of creativity that we have, because we think money. But when you think community currency, you think relationship. You have to think community. And that's a different perspective than when you just go and be able to pay for a product and services without even looking at the person. You need to engage. And so for me, there's an essential part of de-entangling, repatterning the part of a scarcity, to think abundantly, to think about flows in a different way, like it's open, it's available, and it's designed for abundance of flow. That would be it. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, Enric.
Hi everyone. Well, about good experience, I think that the best moments of the experience of the Cooperativa Integral Catalana are interesting to share about. But I can remember about all the period between 2010 and 2013, where I was there, and we saw how a community confederated with local communities of around all the country of Catalonia was able to grow up a network with 17 or until 20 local social currencies and one regional currency at the level of Catalonia that was created by the Integral.
Is everybody also seeing Enric freezing? Yeah.
Yeah, he froze a bit then.
All right, well, maybe Dill, you'll say a few things until we get him back.
Yeah, I do hear mutual credit's not a thing. What is the thing is the groups of people that come together around the process of mutual credit. And that's my sort of best experience. Again, I was involved heavily in Brixton Letts in the 90s. And what it did was create, in a very, very atomized sort of inner city place, it created an enormous amount of social connection. And it was a type of social connection that I think is very rare. People increasingly have good friends and strangers, and there's not much of a gap between the two. And a lot of people in Brixton developed large acquaintanceship, people that they would say hi to in the street. But if you didn't see that person for 3 years or ever phone them up, and then you met them again in the street, you would say hi just as happily as you had 3 years previously. There was no guilt that you hadn't, been out to the pub with them or invited them around for dinner or done a trade with them or anything. It was just nice to know that there were people in this inner city area with tens of thousands of strangers who you were connected with. That was hugely powerful. The negative experience was seeing people committing to those groups on the basis that this mutual credit would connect them and having bad experiences. So the only plumber that joined Brixton Let Scheme was immediately plus 1,000 and frankly had had enough Reiki to last him the rest of his life. And he had to stop trading, but also he'd taken 1,000 Brixton bricks instead of pounds, and he is not a rich guy, and that was quite I mean, I still know the guy, he's a great friend of mine, but that was a hard thing to happen to him, and he trusted the group and the network that this would work for him, and found that it hadn't. And so that's for me a real thing that we have to be aware of is that if we are saying to people there is economic value in participating in these networks, then if they take us seriously, they might well commit significant opportunity cost to that group. And we have a great responsibility there, and it can hurt people. And I hate to see that.
I mean, I think what you've been talking about is this interaction between money and social cohesion, and that in some ways these types of currencies are returning the social cohesion that has been taken away from us by these very disembodied transactions, this fiat currency coming from, and it's taken away trust, and it's taken away, and it has this like, oh, someone's going to come after you nature about it. And I think I want to, so, and I think that that's a real big fundamental, right? How do we do things? And I think Ferananda was talking about this, and I think Sue as well, like where do you get to a point where it's like, I'll just babysit your kids. You don't have to give me something, or you know what, you owe more than other people because, you need more. That's okay in a humane society. And in our monetary system, those things are not forgiven. Those things are not seen in that way. And and Giuseppe pointed out a really great point. Like, look, as long as you got to pay taxes to the big guy and you're dependent on these petrodollars, this isn't necessarily the path to something. So I guess I want to ask everybody, like, both, like, what do you see as a natural path for this to expand more? Or is Giuseppe right? Is this not really leading to making a huge impact on the world? So this is your question, so I'm going to call on you last, Giuseppe. But
okay, cool.
Because you asked the question, like, wait a second, is this really going anywhere? And what would it take for it to be big?
Okay. I mean, I didn't want to sound so pessimistic, but I wanted to sort of and it came through Ferananda and Dio. So I'll try to be highlighting the different viewpoints. So, and actually the different nature of many of these schemes. So one thing is the babysitting circle, and that I would term like care economy, peer-to-peer, people-to-people. That's one thing. And definitely there's a lot of value and there is a lot of potential in that, if you ask me. And it's probably one of those self-sustaining sort of ecosystem who can locally thrive if you find a good balance between those who gives and those who receive, because that's the fundamental problem in all of these networks. You've got an incomplete supply, incomplete demand, and you try to match them, and it's never going to work. Not even the dollar markets are perfect, and you have perfect demand and supply matching. So this is one thing. Then I would refer to Dio and the experience of the plumber, because then we're moving from, people exchanging experiences, values, even things, but on a person-to-person basis. I would say community-centered, stateless. Like the state is not in those transactions. They don't care, But when the plumber does 1,000 pounds of plumbing, that's a taxable event. That's why I'm referring to barriers and non-neutrality in this institutional framework we are embedded in. This is a crucial point. It's not that we are crappy, and this movement has been going on since ages. I mean, you can look at Veer, but you can look at Gazelle, you can look at Proudhon, and way back. So this is nothing new, in a sense. As crypto is nothing new. If you look at what it really deeply is, not talking about the tech side, but the real beings and what we're talking about. So when it comes to the plumber, and from the plumber you go up to the supplier of the plumber, things get harder, because the supplier of the plumber is going to source the plumbing equipment somewhere. Now, is that plumbing equipment produced locally? I don't know. In Sardinia, definitely not. We import those things, you know. So you see that the problems are different. So there's the taxation issue. There's the supply chains being completely scattered all over the place. So we've had 20 years of global commerce, and we don't have mass producing facilities in a distributed, like we don't have mask where they need. But that's just a consequence. It's the same thing for the plumber equipment. Let's not talk about cell phones. and you know, so what we're trying to do, and that's like a bit of hope, is trying to stimulate a dialogue between stakeholders and decision makers. So we try to be a bridge between the plumber and the guy writing the regulation that affects the plumber. That's really hard. And it's a very thin line. And it's actually not my job. I happen to be there in the middle of networks of people, because I talk to you guys as I talk to a university professor or a regulator, because they call me and I answer. But these are real hurdles, and these are not being addressed. Last bit, biggest hurdle is not the idea of the man coming and knocking on the door, ask you to repay a debt, because mutual credit is mutual debt, and mutual debt is mutual risk, and mutual risk should mean mutual commitment. That is the heartbeat, and the heartbeat is, how do we, as people or as companies or people and companies operating in a place, agree on how to deal, not with the good side. It's the wave, I agree, but how you go up, that's the heartbeat. It's easy to go down when you're up. It's hard to go up when you're down.
Great.
And
so
that's it.
So Enric, I'm going to get back to you, but this thread is super interesting, so I kind of want to keep going down this a little bit. And I would ask, you know, on this thread, like Giuseppe pointed out a couple of things. One is the supply chain, and then the other is the growth. And I would say that right now, in terms of the pandemic, a lot of people are talking more about local supply chains and the difficulty in international supply chains. So that's one area that there might be an opportunity. So maybe somebody has something to say about the opportunity that may be providing. The other opportunity, and this has been exacerbated, although not created by the pandemic, is this kind of thing. Like all of a sudden, we're talking to each other at a global scale. That is, the interactions that we can do at a global scale. So opportunity one, localization of supply chain, and the other opportunity is all of a sudden, hey, maybe we're going to be able to operate with one another among our different mutual commitment groups. And so can any of us speak to either one or both of those opportunities, and how your communities may or may not be addressing those, or how you personally see that evolving?
So I'm going to talk about the Credit Commons then, which is exactly the initiative to empower this coordination of many groups in a very open and free and viral way. Tim Jenkin and Matthew wrote the Credit Commons white paper, and Tim Jenkin sort of invented this idea with the CES model, where he produced a model where there's a central exchange which can connect a number of mutual credit schemes together. And then together, Matthew and Tim proposed a very simple protocol which allows any group to federate to a wider network, wider in scope, in geographical scope, or in maybe an industry horizontal scope. And also for any group to spawn any member of any group to spawn a child network, so that you have a mechanism which allows for a sort of viral growth of a network. And the implementation of that, that Matthew and I began and worked out a sort of tech description of that last summer, and is now being built within an offshoot of the Open Credit Network, which has got this, it's just a collaboration, it's not a company or anything, which we're calling Mutual Credit Clubs, is to build out this technological promise, which Matthew's already got demonstrated, in a way which makes it possible for any group to join a larger group without changing how it works internally. So there's no attempt to own how a member arranges their internal organization. It just says you can connect with other people and use mutual credit at any level of abstraction that suits you. And that is a very exciting proposition. And a key function of that, a key requirement of that, is that every network that's set up is a mutual, so that all members of these groups are co-creating them. They work for their members. There's no organization sitting at the center of the web of these networks of networks, but simply their collaborations around a very simple protocol for mutual benefit. And I could talk a lot, but I think that's a headline. And
yeah, also anybody else looking at local supply chains or interoperability between different networks here? Sue, did you want to say something about that? I saw you unmuted.
I can see in my local area that we're beginning to create that, but not consciously, like, you know, the library of things, that kind of thing, at a basic level. And we're in a unique place in some ways that in the ward I live in, we have people with 56 different first languages. So you can imagine the different kinds of cultures that come with that as well. And that gives us incredible opportunities to learn from the different cultures without us actually traveling there, because they brought them here. And it would be a beautiful way to begin to connect and see the value from each of those cultures. Unfortunately, they're socially cleansing Brixton at the moment. We seem to be edgy, and so we're losing the people. There's incredible potential everywhere. And it's awe-inspiring listening to people and how they're doing it, how they're working with it. It's also awe-inspiring when we look at what we need to do. And I can only just feel like I'm in the middle of, I suppose, the previous session's analogy of a river. I'm in a river where I'm kind of flowing along with it and hoping to get something growing from it in some kind of a way. I can see where it's come from, and I think it was Giuseppe that said, you know, centuries ago it's been going on, and it's going to go on, but where and how and what's our part in this? And mostly it's, how do we get people to live and work together in a way that's going to be beneficial for all, mutually beneficial for all in the future? And we all have ideas about it. My experience of monetary reform in the 90s is that we ended up arguing against each other, which wasn't helpful. And what I wonder about with this is that we're beginning to coordinate, collect, collaborate. So we're actually beginning to learn from each other's good points, bad points, if they're the right words. And I find it very hopeful. That's about as far as I can go, because the truth is I don't absolutely know where we're going.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think it really relates to when we talk about decentralization. And one of the images that I use when I talk to people about distributed decision making is the analogy of the body. and I've got a circulatory system and a respiratory system and a nervous system, and they all know how to speak to each other. And that really speaks to me to what you said about all these different cultures coming together in Brixton, and now they'll be able to, they found like a central hub or a brain, whatever you want to call that, and their ability now to interoperate with each other is being formed in these kind of hubs where they come together, multiple cultures, and then spread out. And so that seems to be a very hopeful sign. I want to go back to Enric because you got cut off there.
Yeah, I was talking about the experience on the Cooperativa Integral Catalana and the eco-xarxes in Catalonia that was building up for 3-4 years between 2009 2013, and how we experimented the practice of building local communities confederated at a regional scale and being able to have a cooperative ecosystem that was supporting these local communities, and got around 40 people working with around 30% of their income based on mutual credit, and how all this process was based in economic disobedience, that also was part of the economic model. And I was referring how, well, Giuseppe was telling before that it was difficult to be inside of this legal capitalist system for building it, and we never pretended to do that. So we pretended the other way around, and we was doing it outside of the system. So then the bad experience of it is how this in the following years went by down, and we cannot say this exists as it was before, but there are different local experiences that continue happening, and how this didn't have continuation. One reason could be the human side, the problems between people, the lack of a common vision about where to go and how to go there together, and this also affected the economic model, so it didn't have the continuation to sustain the Catalan side of it, no? the Cooperativa Integral. So I think that these are elements that are continuing interacting, how we sustain models, how we sustain participatory models, because all of this was assemblearian. Perhaps in a way it's more easy to sustain a small business group that built a system, but in assemblearian process that is more transparent, more open, etc., the human relations are not so easy to manage at the long term. No? So we have to see how to solve that and how to sustain the human and social economic model of it for not having experience that go up and down like it happened.
Wow, so much great stuff going on, and then so many lessons learned. What would you guys, what kinds of things do you think, for people who are saying, hey, sounds like a solution for my community, this sounds like something that I want to do. What are some of the things that you need to have in place? What are some of the scaffoldings that you need to have in place to create some sorts of mutual commitment currencies? And what are some of the things you better avoid?
I believe that what makes a successful mutual credit is to be able to identify with the first group of people, to be able to identify what are real problems that the community has, where has the flow stopped, and how to make it happen, how to make it real. So we were mentioning about the problem of the plumber, because the plumber didn't have any more to trade with. He had sufficient Reiki for a lifetime. So we will find that with a farmer, right? If we want to bring the real utilities, the basic needs that people have, people will go and they will go into the circle, hoping to get those needs fulfilled. So what of those needs can you bring in? For example, in the community of Olines, they said, well, what if we would bring the taxi drivers? Because in that town, everybody moves by taxi, everyone. Like, it's really a transportation, important piece in transportation. So they spoke with the taxi drivers, and the taxi drivers said, okay, we'll accept a percentage of payment in Olines. And because they did so, then more people were incentivized to participate. So it's like, find those places. Many times people want to implement mutual credit just by ideology alone. Oh, we need to get out of the monetary system. Let's bring mutual credit and we'll be saved. And then they get pretty disappointed when they cannot buy a cell phone, they cannot get their water, they cannot. So we need to stop thinking about it as money, and we have to start being creative, thinking outside of money, thinking flow. So if you think about all those flows that are made possible, how can I bring them in? The plumber might need a doctor, education for their children. He might be interested in some local businesses if the big local businesses were to accept the currency. Maybe, so is creativity. If creativity happens, there's a lot of possibility. Also, mutual credit could be also seen for other things. If you think about any unit where you can have an IOU, that unit can be accounted. You could call it a mutual credit. So you could have a farm of solar panels where the unit becomes a kilowatt hour, and then people can trade kilowatt hours, and that is already sustained by real infrastructure that then helps people because it's already backed by electricity. So, there's more creativity than just money. And so think outside of it and think flows. That would be my advice.
That's fabulous. Anyone else have more thoughts about that? Mary, I know you're not a panel member, but I think you probably have as much experience as anybody on the panel. Do you have anything on some of these things?
Yeah, looking at how Let's groups collapse, and I saw some of what happened in Brixton. What I realised, and it's interesting to hear the story about the babysitting circle. I got an insight into it when I went to a permaculture course, and they talked about designing the permaculture plot, and you have different zones, and close to home there's a balance between the husband and wife and the children, who's pulling their weight, etc. They don't put numbers into that conversation. And then you have your friends and you might say, I owe you one. And then the next circle, and I'm about the permaculture, you see, you start with the house, and then you have the flower and the herb garden, then you have the vegetable garden, then you have the orchard, then you have the wild woods. And you have to look at the terrain and decide where to put it. You have to design it. Because and I think that your friends are in the garden, and then the alettes might be where the vegetables are growing, because you could sell them, but you could give them to friends. So it's a kind of intermediate area. And when you're in the wild woods, you're in stocks and shares, and money can disappear. You can get killed by a tiger, etc., etc. So that is those zones are in the monetary system. And what happens in a Let's group is that some people have to move out into the orchard area. If they develop something, they need to sell it for real money. Some people move into the garden, like their friends who thought it's much more fun to just have a sharing thing between ourselves in the babysitting circle. So a mutual credit system is inherently unstable. And as I think Ferananda said, if you're running it, it doesn't run itself. You've got to constantly look and see who's overspending, who isn't getting value, and you've got to manage it and try and get the useful skills and goods into the system. So, and it's because it's not part of the mainstream. It's a sort of intermediate, very sort of fragile area. And what I've seen is the process where people just get old and tired, or just burnt out, or it's they know all the people, they're not much fun, and they just form their own friends from amongst the group, and then just go off and don't manage the main system. And the fact that it's not funded in this country, there's been a lot of briefing against it, means that you cannot get the serious professionals in to do all the planning and the outreach and the pastoral care that needs to be done. And we were briefed against by New Economics Foundation, who decided to bring in time banking. And the advantage with time banking is because they don't talk about currency. It doesn't challenge the banking system. They talk about volunteering and reciprocity and wearing halos and all that kind of thing. And but they have paid staff who manage the vulnerable clients, and that's how they've been, you know, more sustainable. But as long as that funding fails, the system collapses because people aren't doing it themselves. So and you know, I realize more and more as I've tried to support groups, and I put up software for them, and they're even bright enough to, or committed enough to learn how to use it. So it's really, really hard work. And I haven't got enough hours in the day to support people because it's not funded. There's nobody from above. And the model in the voluntary sector is to have people being paid to manage volunteers. That's what they love in the voluntary sector. And Let's doesn't fit into it. Have I said enough?
Thank you so much. That's really, those are all very important, you know, lessons from the real, you know, from really down in the roots, people who've actually been doing this. Dill wants to say something. Go ahead.
If I could really quickly, I just want to say how grateful I am for that permaculture zonal metaphor. I think that's incredibly powerful and extremely useful. I have been exploring this idea, I'm going to say this really quickly, that essentially what's happened is economy has invaded almost all of life, and that what Let's does, the story of the babysitting group stopping keeping score, is help us to reposition the boundary of where money is a useful thing for coordination between people who don't know each other very well. And that's where its power, I think, is strong. But because money became associated with the control systems, it's been pushed into all sorts of areas of life where it does massive harm. So the idea of paying for care is a fundamentally very, very dangerous territory to get into. And so I'm not going to say any more, but I just think that zonal metaphor is really powerful. I'm going to use it. Thank you, Mary.
Fantastic. So I want to ask a question, really it's for all of you, is on the one hand, you know, we said, well, it's not making a dent in the monetary system. And on the other hand, we said, well, that's not the point. So how do you measure success? What are the things that you should be looking for as you establish these currencies? Or what are the things that you've seen that are like, yes, I know I'm a success. These are the things that I'm looking out for or measuring for, that would say to me, this is working. Because I mean, we've been taught in our society, like the money, the bottom line, that's success. But I think we all know that that's not the definition of success. So what are you guys looking for to indicate success in your systems? And I'm sure it'll be different for each one of you, depending on the systems. Maybe Enric, maybe you can address what do you consider success in your system, and then we can go around.
I think that when we try to build systems, one main goal is to be able to escalate and have many people using it. At the same time, one other goal is that this use create a transformation, no? create an impact, create a change. So this will be two main elements. Sometimes we have a lot of experience of systems that can be massive, but finally we discover they are not producing any change. So just the participation is not enough on that. No? For example, if you use social currency in a way that just it is changed from fiat and then it changed back, but it's not creating a local community, then the social currency is just a token for payment. You can make it very massive, but it's not really producing another economy. So this is one example. No, then when we talk, so we can understand that mutual credit is more than that. It's producing the change on changing the way how money works. But for then being successful, it needs to cover all the needs or many of the needs that we have in an ecosystem. Perhaps not all, perhaps to cover all the housing or water flows or mainstream things of the society will not cover all, but can cover many of them. And it can cover in a way that it being closing circles. No, you are closing circles, so it becomes useful for people to use as alternatives to conventional money. And for that, you discover that it's not just about money, but you need to create a network of production around it. You need to incentivize cooperative, freelancers, small business to join on it and to create the capacity together to be growing the ecosystem. No? Sometimes we see that people that is interested in another money think so much just about the money, but this is not enough. We need to introduce currency as a part of a broad ecosystem of building another economy for another society.
That, Grace, is a brilliant question. And Enric, you gave me time to really think about it. How do I measure success? And I'm talking from me. Success for me is basically about the people. It's about the movement in terms of the movement within a local community, whether that's a specialized one like food, so you see how the food goes, how it grows, how it gets used, cooked, how it goes round, the trading, and also the connections, because the connections themselves are extraordinarily valuable, even if you don't get any trading, but if you get the connections. So then I thought, well, what kind of criteria? How do I measure that? Do I do a contact and trace app? No, thank you. And I wondered about how people measure it. And I noticed Bhutan's GDP is measured in happiness. What are the actual criteria that we would use? But I really think that is helpful exploration in order to focus us on what we could measurably talk about is the value of. But also, I really do not want to lose what is something that we can't measure, which is how do I feel? How do I feel in charge of my life? How do I feel empowered enough to be able to provide what I need or what I want and to get what I need? How can I live in that kind of environment?
I would take a slightly different angle, and I would say that a successful mutual credit system, or as Enric was saying, this sort of attempt to create new economic spaces and new economic modes of production, of consumption, of collaboration, call it what you want. I mean, this stuff is successful, I would say, if it's real, in a sense that it does connect to productive capacity, in a sense that it has a chance to put bread on the table. But more than putting bread on the table is enabling the farmer to work on the land, to grow the crops, and so on and so forth. So that's one. And the exact consequence would be it is successful if it exists through time. That's the only. I mean, we live in a super harsh environment when it comes to finance and monetary innovation and social innovation. There's no freedom in experimentation right now. I mean, unless you go to the desert and do the Burning Man, but that's a one-off. Keeping the practice of economic coordination and economic self-management in a way is important through time. In our experience, we've only been able to do this because of two reasons. First, we didn't do this as volunteers. And I really appreciate Mary's points on the perversion of voluntarism going on if I understood what the previous point was. We realized that in order for us to be able to build this thing or help co-create it, we needed to have bread on the table. And that's why Sardex is complementary to in the current scenario, as any mutual credit can aspire to be. As much as, I mean, I long for and work for and think for better, newer, fairer agreements between people and the planet, if we're so clever to realize we are microbes in a universe. And so not just voluntarism, it takes work, it takes wages. The coordination is enormously expensive. We don't see this in the monetary system. But that's why that is one of the reasons why money is expensive to get access to. It is expensive in a million ways that we don't see, because again, it's sort of given. So I would say not just voluntarism is not going to cut it. We also need to eat, and at the same time, existence through time. I'm happy if the plumber renews his participation in Sardex year after year, because it means he's still working. First important thing, is still alive and kicking. And if he's renewing, it means with the network and the other companies through the network have helped him stay alive. Some that do not manage their business properly, as well as their lives, you can give them all mutual credit system in the world. They will still run into trouble. Because also, I mean, this is one fraction, it could be 20% of your income. But if it turns to be 50% of your income, the system we are living in is brutal and ruthless. Altruism is economic suicide in our days. So people need to be careful of their choices and the consequences of their actions. That's what I'm saying. And be very clear that if you want to today to have a meaningful change, I mean, our approach is trying to be cautious, trying to be lawful, and try to exploit the centimeter square that we have to push change forward. Incredibly hard, not rewardful, and on top, we've had investment. I mean, Sardex is a miracle because also we've got investors on board who believe in our vision. But these people also want returns. So, you know.
I love that you bring such a down-to-earth business perspective to this kind of, you know, there's kind of history of this, oh, this is a bunch of hippies doing stuff. No, this is, you know, we are in a struggle against some very, very powerful organizations, and some people are willing to make more personal sacrifices than others, and that's great. Matt is next, and then I can go to Mary.
So the question of how you judge success is something that donors and investors always ask. To me, the answer is extremely obvious from their point of view. You want to have more transactions, more people engaged, and more communities, in my case, using the technology. But what I've always thought about in terms of my own success metrics is how many dollars, euros, or pounds are being displaced. How can we be eating into and replacing the mainstream economy? And that's how I feel that I will have had an impact on the world.
Great. I want to go to some questions that are coming up in the chat, so people can either put things in the chat or come here and join us in the video area. And the first question was from Oliver, and he said, you know, what are the next steps for people? How can we make mutual credit more ubiquitous, and what do you guys see as next for our communities? And Mary actually even addressed that already a little bit, talking about, yeah, we have to address the legal issues and we have to prepare ourselves to speak correctly about it. What are some other things that people see as next steps, or how to make this more ubiquitous?
I can tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in the UK. So Open Credit Network is launched, and that's inspired directly by Sardex, but we are now as I say, wanting to go to this next level of building the tools to allow any group to join together with any other group without changing how it works internally, to allow any member of any group using that approach to spawn a child group. So in Sardinia, they've had great success, I understand, with business to employee schemes. So they started business to business, but now employees of businesses can use the businesses node on the network to trade widely. In the Credit Commons system, the business itself could spawn a child network for its internal accounting for that work. And indeed, an employee of that business could then spawn a child network and run that in their neighborhood to connect their neighborhood through them, through the business that they work for, to the region of Sardinia. And then further to that, if Sardex and Open Credit Network and some people we've just started talking to in France Sparta Co-op, for instance, decided to form a Europe-wide association, then those people in the neighborhood in Sardinia, through their member who's an employee, through the business, through Sardex, through the Europe-wide network, could trade with someone in the UK. And this is, Matthew's got working software that shows how all this works, and it's eminently doable. And those are the next steps that we're doing.
Fantastic. Matt?
And to put it another way, it's now possible, or we're on the cusp of it being possible, to do mutual credit on a global scale. And that doesn't mean we make one huge mutual credit group. It means that little groups can connect together. And so that's a major new innovation, in my opinion.
I saw another question or sort of inquiry on this issue of how, how we can address some of the greater ecological issues. And I definitely see, if I think about the donut economics models, I definitely see mutual credit and local currencies and these kinds of economic models resolving a lot of those internal things like social inequalities and issues. But when it comes to that ecological ceiling, that would be, that's a different kind of structure. But maybe some of you have ideas about that. I know Ferananda was talking about actual resource-backed kinds of currencies. Are there any thoughts, or is that a separate topic?
There's a very obvious linkage with ecology with the growth of the current money system. So you have this growth imperative. That means the economy must always grow because of the way that money is issued. And because it's used for saving and it's not available to be paid back. And mutual credit solves that problem, at the very least, on the ecological level.
In terms of what's next, I work at the R&D at Sardex, and I am aware of Matthew work and deal, and there is a lot of technical work going on, trying to reach some interoperability standards. And also offering solutions that can be adopted, be it cloud, blockchain, whatever. That's all good. And we might have some new stuff coming from us for the rest of the world. We've never done anything like this, so this is just a little primer. But I won't shed any more details on it because I like to maybe show you more a different time. What I would think, though, is the next step is going deeper instead of wider. I think we've even today have still a lot to do in our core communities. We're active in some over 10 regions in Italy through partners and in various ways. Like, it's a mix of collaboration and coordination. But I don't think really the key is connecting. It's important to be able to bridge between different localities. But coming back to the ecological question, which is also a production and consumption sort of dilemma, is how do we ensure that any community everywhere has enough to feed itself, has enough to keep itself busy? Because I think the only reason for working 8 hours is just that people go crazy if they get too much free time. So work-life balance, food, industrial production, and energy. These are the areas. And to do that, you don't need big bridges to nowhere. The point is, how do you develop local productive capacity that gives you food, that gives you energy, that gives you shelter or housing? I mean, these will be questions where I guess in the next couple of years, we'll see huge spaces opening up, but they will be wastelands left by the institutions that run the things today that will not be able to keep up, as it happened with the hospitals during the pandemic, because the whole society is not built towards, it's not a donut, is just an ever climbing nutcase, and to change that, we need to go deep, I think, and then maybe, like, if there's enough strong pockets of these sort of things, then it's like a permaculture patchwork that in the end changes the landscape, like a go game. You enclose the system, and I agree with Matthew that it's very important to kind of evaluate how many or how much fiat currency is diverted and made to circulate locally through mutual credit system. We have a metric for that. Last year, we helped keep 7 million euro or so circulating locally, and we have data to prove that. But 7 million in a GDP of 7 billion. There's a lot of room
to go. Yeah. The next thing I wanted to talk about, I guess, is also about the governance itself of these systems. And a number of you mentioned that it's really important to have the champions of the system and those core individuals or core businesses. And Giuseppe is actually running a centralized system. But if you want to create a more decentralized system or more decentralized governance, have any of you had experience with that? Like, how does the community manage this so that power doesn't end up getting centralized, so that the community decision making about how to give others credit is dominant, and that it's actually a community-owned thing rather than just kind of centralized around a few individuals who may or may not get burned out? Do any of you have something to say about that?
I think I might be right in saying that Credit Network is sort of very, very rare in having considered that architecture for a business-to-business network. I think there are probably quite a lot of fully mutual networks in the P2P setting. The Open Credit Network sort of looked at Sardex and sort of really inspired by them, but we wanted to try and see if we could do this. And very, very briefly, what we've managed to design is a very simple members agreement that means that every member business is a one member, one vote member of a mutual, but that the management and operation of the network is, as it were, contracted out to some of the members. So myself, Dave, and Ollie, who are the founder members of Mutual Credit Network, founded a separate organization called Mutual Credit Services. As the original members, we voted ourselves as the admin team, and we contracted out the running of the software and the development of the policies to Mutual Credit Services. If the network develops to a point where the members begin to take an interest in, why aren't these credit limits the way we want them to be? Why isn't this network being grown in the way we want it to be? Why is the publicity material saying things that we don't agree with? Any of those things, then they can just vote in a different admin team who can find a different supplier of maybe some part of the services. They might say, well, you guys carry on doing the software, that's boring, but we want someone else to design the website. And that would be absolutely fine. So that mechanism is not tried and tested. It hasn't been through a crisis. We haven't done the learning that Sardex have done. We hope we'll get to go there. But we've tried. And we have some good advisors on that. Chris Cook, who's involved, is got lots of history with that sort of structure. So we're hopeful.
Fabulous.
I just have few minutes, then I really have to jump. I just wanted to comment on the governance. I mean, we've always been very, very aware of governance issues, how to prevent them, and so on and so forth. But we don't have any formalized governance structure in place for members. Yet, all that we do is bound to a contract. So the basic sort of governance is provided by a contract, which is lawful and abides by the Italian law and courts. So that's the sort of governance that people adhere to when they join Sardex. Now, the best way, or the best sort of indicator that we have as I would say for impact system. I don't want to say for profit, because for us impact is more important than profit. And you know, your governance get judged by participation and active dispute resolution by members themselves. I mean, when you've got 5,000 businesses, you're gonna get troubles and problems between them. As much as you like the idea that the system doesn't increase the amount of trouble, but trouble happens, and shit happens, and you can't prevent that. So in our case, the governance is all in those agreements. They of course have been changed. We changed them and updated them a lot of times, and we changed them based on the feedback from the community. Like, we didn't just wake up one day, you know, we are scrapping, at one point we scrapped transaction fees and went fully subscription. And we still are doing fully subscription for B2B. Though in time, we changed the contract. There is now a fair usage policy, because people use the subscription and did like 12 times the volume they were supposed to. I mean, that's unfair usage to me. And people are always free when we upgrade the contract, and that's the law again, to opt out. They don't like the rule, they can opt out. Nobody's taking their credits. They got time to spend, and if they owe something, they gotta pay that back, either in goods and services or in fiat if they can't. And there's a normal debt collection process that goes on, because, you know, the plumber, as much as he likes to be a part of a movement of change, needs to eat, and he doesn't like giving out plumbing services for free. It doesn't just work like that. We won't get to any mainstream adoption if these concepts are not grasped. At least when we talk to production in our system. Kenya, different probably, because people are self-employed. They just go and do, and maybe 90% don't report taxes. Europe, the US, it's a different story. And I have to go and jump. Thanks a lot for the invite, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so again, I just kind of want to do closing round. We've got another 10 minutes. A couple of the additional questions that people have kind of asked, which I think we covered in various ways, is like, how much do we think that this is going to be a replacement for the real economy, also in size or other ways, and then what's next. But like I said, this is the closing round, so you've got 10 minutes left in the session, so really just say whatever you want. And I'm going to go in the opposite direction that I did the opening round. So, Dill.
I'm just going to keep it as short as I can. And I'm just going to read out something I wrote on Twitter, 2 tweets, so it's nice and short. If we wish to build a viable new economy, we must provide people with tools which allow an equal degree of freedom that they experience in the bank money economy, but which have systemic implications that drive desire satisfaction, regeneration, and relocalization, and emphasize value creation over money making. So we can't expect people to join in with this new economy process because they want to save the planet, because they have to feed their children and look forward to a dignified old age. And the current system owns all the tools for promising that, whether it delivers or not. And the second tweet says, capitalism is built by ordinary humans, not as a theoretical project, but as a daily act of creativity. Capitalists don't work according to a published rule book, as left-wingers and progressives often do, but as systemic inhabitants trying to find a good pathway through the landscape. We need to offer people a landscape through which the good pathways lead them away from the destructive practices of the current economy.
Great. Yeah. Enrique?
I think that we need to continue working for making the technology adapted to the needs of community groups, the needs of human groups, both at the local and the global scale. Many times we see that the governance of the groups are adapted to the technology. For example, we see that the technology is based on having an admin, and people need to have an admin because the technology says that. And we need to make the other way around. We need the technology to be so flexible to adapt to the real will of the communities that are self-organizing together. This will facilitate very much people to develop their own models and to be flexible. They can decide one thing one day, in the following assembly they can change. They can change after 1 year, and the technology should be able to adapt to anything of that. So for that, together with these decentralized models that are being built, we need them to be more flexible and more adaptive to the real human groups.
Thank you. Ferananda?
I would say that my invitation is for all of us to be more creative and to be thinking beyond just money or tradable currencies and products and services to things that create more wealth. And wealth obviously distinguished as beyond money, and to be able to then experiment with even small circles, large circles, and not just like, okay, we have mutual credit for products and services. There's a world of what mutual credit can do that is beyond products and services.
I think a lot of us have in mind the dream that if we do well enough, we will be able to create an alternative that will somehow displace the behemoth of capitalism. But I don't think it's going to work like that at all. I think that capitalism is in crisis and it's failing because of climate change, because of COVID, because of internal dynamics. And the best we can do is be there as it falls to catch people. And that takes the pressure off us a lot. We don't have to be system changers. We just have to keep patiently doing what we're doing until our moment comes.
Awesome. Sue?
I want to speak, I suppose, at this moment to the present reality for me, as well as with other people. My reality is that I'm neurodiverse, and often, and I've been working quite a lot the last 24 hours, often I need time and space and very often asleep in order to be able to capture the amazing wealth of experience here and ideas and suggestions. So it's like little jigsaw puzzle pieces, and I've got to somehow put it together in the new way. So I'm not helpful at kind of bringing things together. Tomorrow morning, maybe, but not today. Okay. But I'm hopeful. I'm not helpful, but I'm hopeful. And increasing clarity. I hear this conversation, which I've been hearing kind of over the decades, with much more clarity, much more action related to it, heartfelt but not fantasy land. So that's about all I can do. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, everybody. This has been a really wide-ranging panel with a lot of perspectives and just, I mean, probably a few hundred years of experience, you know, if we totaled up all the experience of everybody here on the panel with these different types of economies and mutual commitments and technologies. So just thank you everyone so much.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, brilliantly chaired. Really appreciate that. And it was a great session. It was really nice to hear from so many different voices.